Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Design Strategy and Methods. I'm Mr. Khalil, and I will chair this segment. We will take questions towards the end of all the presentation. Today with us, I would like to introduce Gregory Hartman, his presentation on utilizing the ready-made as an instrument to develop an understanding of the principle of art and design with students as related to the interior.
Oh, thank you. All right. Good morning. Today I'm going to be speaking about a series of studies and an overall project that was developed in the spring of 2022 for a foundation level course in interior design at Louisiana State University at the College of Art and Design. This research has continued to develop from another course I taught there entitled Graphics for Interior Designers in both the fall of 2021 and the fall of 2022. I'm excited to present this talk at the Applying Education in a Complex World AMPS conference organized by Sheridan College in Toronto, Canada. I'd like to begin with this quote by Joseph Albers in reference to both art, creativity, and education. 1 and 1 is 2, that's business. 1 and 1 is 4, that's art, or if you like it better, is life. I think that makes clear the manifold seeing, the manifold reading of the world makes us broader, wider, richer. In education, a single standpoint cannot give a solid, firm stand. Thus, let us have different viewpoints, different standpoints. Let us observe in different directions and from different angles. And what I'd like to say to my students is 1 and 1 is 3. Or just think, imagine that 1 + 1 is not 2 outside of what mathematics has instructed you or what you have been taught to be the truth in order to inspire, to get them to be creative, to think outside of the box and explore possibilities beyond, including all potentials. But of course, there are always boxes, different types of boxes, or in some types squares or frames, which are the parameters for creation in some regards, but these parameters have to be stretched. Now, it is useful to take a look at something art historically that is quite well known, some of the productions of Joseph Albers for the serialization of his project of studying colors. For Albers made his first homage to the square in 1950, and during the next quarter century, he produced more than 2,000 paintings and 160 distinct prints that adhere to a fixed set of formal parameters. A square with 3 or 4 concentric but unequal margins through which the artist explored a seemingly infinite variety of combinations. In 1963, he published the first edition of Interaction of Color, which revolutionized the discourse surrounding perception and pedagogy. And considering the context of this conference, Applying Education in a Complex World, we will take a look at one project from some of my students where they were asked to apply a series of terms, basic principles of art and design, as connected to everyday objects or ready-made objects that they were set to bring into the studio classroom and photograph, alter, manipulate, and construct into new images, thinking outside of the box, but nevertheless within the boundaries of a square. But perhaps next time it will be a circle. So in many ways, this assignment was geared towards attempting to answer this question: how can the ready-made, particularly when associated with the historical personage of the modernist artist Marcel Duchamp, have relevance in a day and age when virtually all aspects of our lives are beholden to ready-made products, ready-made experiences, ready-made meanings? For example, this student brought in a pair of speakers, a comb, glasses, an air freshener, and 1 running shoe. These photographs are nothing extraordinary or profound. They are quite banal and almost could be considered not proficient at all. But on the level of an introductory assignment or an exercise with the simple, within the second semester of a foundation course in interior design that is geared towards both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional studies, the vision or the focus of the project was to start the students with a simple prompt. While this student brought in earrings, a chain, glasses, a metal feather, and a binder clip. Here we have a love mug, a can, a ribbon, a hair clip, and a pearl necklace. Another portable speaker. For some reason, they all had a lot of metal feathers, a hair clip, perfume bottle, and a pair of glasses. And we have a thimble, portable hard drive, wood ring, pliers, and a hair clip. While we do see some overlap in their choices to bring what they brought, there was still a great variety. So continuing with Albers, if one says red, the name of a color, there are 50 people listening. It can be expected that there will be 50 reds in their mind. And one can be sure that all these reds will be very different. And then here's two examples of studies of the aforementioned red: Joseph Albers' Amish Square from 1968, and Martha Rothko's Orange and Red on Red from 1957. Part of what is intriguing, especially considering Albers' project, is the sheer volume. He produced more than 2,000 paintings, as I said previously, and 160 distinct prints. And these parameters are essentially a framework similar to what I've asked my students to explore through the principles of art and design. So then perhaps it could be a question of parameters and approach to these parameters that allow a certain creativity to emerge. Or perhaps that is my question: what are the parameters and how can we approach these parameters in order that students or education produces complexity? Just like the earth and the inner core, we begin with exploration, discovery, and experimentation. The core must glow, red like the paintings, though the glow here is a bit more yellow, like the sun, nevertheless. Experimentation, I say, is at the core. Openness is at the core. Discovery, innovation, flexibility, flexible space, undefined answers. The questions are the methodology to discovery, but how can we root into the core? So one quote that I keep on returning to is this statement from Chris Barth, from his book Material and Mind. Education has long sidelined playing as a means of learning, and my students coming to my class after a dozen years of being taught to the test and pressured to achieve grades had naturally developed strong tactical planning habits and aimed at completing the work. And I find this to be very much true with many of the current students. Nevertheless, I say my quote again: 1 + 1 = 3, or free. For thinking free creatively requires openness and a willingness to explore. And this is found in the ready-made, a concept that has its origin in the art projects of Marcel Duchamp from over a century ago, at least. So his 1917 iconic fountain was, as most people know, signed R. Mutt and shocked the art world. Duchamp was suggesting that an everyday item could be considered as art if an artist presented it as such, kicking off a century of debate. Right, so as in this conversational cartoon, which I show the students to kind of put things into context between Duchamp's urinal and Onkawa's untitled date painting. Come on, you're just some stupid urinal. Well, what about you then? I'm questioning what is art, and it's not you. Yes, it is. No, it's not. You're just some date. Who gives a crap? I sold for $4,750,000, I'll have you know. I was created by the famous conceptual artist Onkawa. Well, you suck. Look who's talking. So just to kind of lighten things up for them, and give a playfulness to the project. And here's Duchamp with, an earlier drawing of his, and Onkawa and his best known works, 1 Million Years. It's about the passage and marking of time. It lists each year for the 1 million period leading up to the artwork's conception and the million years that follow it. It is sometimes performed, during which pairs of performers, typically one male and one female for each segment, read dates from each list in order, simultaneously performing 1 million years past and 1 million years future. I also like to kind of show this to the students, another cartoon, which shows, in 1916, all the stuff that Duchamp made art, where it was kind of considered bric-a-brac. Nevertheless, it's useful, or I find it useful, right? Because it kind of lightens the mood for the students. And another quote from Duchamp: and this neo-dada, which they call new realism, pop art, assemblage, etc., is an easy way out and lives on what Dada did. When I discovered the ready-made, I sought to discourage aesthetics. In neo-dada, they have taken my ready-mades and found aesthetic beauty in them. I threw the bottle rack and urinal into their faces as a challenge, and now they admire them for their aesthetic beauty. Some other this is kind of some of the examples that I show the students to kind of give them perspective and kind of an idea of where the project's kind of headed. And then for this presentation, some other kind of art historical artifacts. This is Daniel Spurry's La Douche from 1961. So he says, affixing a real faucet and shower spigot to a laboriously painted landscape of a mountain torrent, Spory 2 uses trompe-l'oeil to address the relationship between painting and object, diving fearlessly into the choppy waters of reality. And this project from Jasper Johns, painted bronze. So these are interesting because first, they are not beer cans. They are bronze cylinders painted to look like beer cans. Each was individually cast from real cans and then set into the independently fabricated base, which means the sculpture is a marriage of three separate parts, the most important of which are not beer cans, but ale cans. This is a critical distinction. In the 50s, regular guys drank beer, sophisticated men drank ale. It was lighter and means real business, as advertisements asserted during that decade. So, let me see something. Right. So, speaking about the kind of mass market and then the object, right, in terms of its how it's produced. Even so, we could also consider, a project by Andy Warhol, Brillo Box, and others, and it could kind of go on and on. This is a continuing sort of area of research for me. So what's interesting, so another quote from Daniel Sotif, who's a writer, art isn't art unless it somehow differentiates itself from the rest of the world's substance. In identifying art with the everyday object and vice versa, then a radical problem emerges: art may disappear. This statement really clarifies and puts into context some of the challenges facing the everyday object and its museumification. So this is a project, a student project. I wanted to show, this is like sort of the first iteration of the assignment from 2021. And the students were asked to, bring in an object and study it, and then make a poster that had sort of a self-referential context to the object. So this student took kind of photographs of a chain and made a series of posters, Be the Change. And then I titled this assignment, Let's Make Some Noise on an Archaeological Aesthetics of Found Objects, Waste. Here's another example of the student project. Feel the Burn, which was a reinterpretation of a found lighter, and a baker's dozen, which was an aesthetically reinterpreted egg carton. So I've always said that we have to put Duchamp's urinal back in the restroom. Now that the urinal is in the restroom of the Queen's Museum, you can see it and pee on it. So this is Tania Bruguera, who's more of a performance artist and a art activist. So the functional object that was removed from its functional purpose over 100 years ago becomes a functioning object once again, immersed in the gallery. Its use returned to it, while previously it was beheaded, a useless art object. Signed, sealed, delivered, I'm yours, as Stevie Wonder would sing. So here are some images of more contemporary projects, the Tania Brugueras, and then also Maurizio Catalan put an 18-karat gold urinal in the Guggenheim in 2016. On the existence of the golden toilet, says curator Nancy Spector from the Brooklyn Museum, the golden throne is meant to be a gesture of provocation, Spector says. The fact that it is very welcoming, inviting for anyone to use, gets to the heart of a lot of questions around exclusivity in the art world and in museums in particular. And this notion of having a very intimate, private experience with a work of art, and a work of art that speaks quite dramatically about its own value, is fascinating on many, many levels, she adds. So this reminds us, or rather provides us with a concept, that of the question of use in art and how it can be related to the application of complex issues within the world of education. So I return to this kind of question that I was trying to answer. What does the idea of almost putting a pseudonymously signed urinal in exhibition, an act that took 100 years ago, say in a world of rampant appropriation and self-conscious, even self-congratulatory simulation? And back to Duchamp, since the tubes of paint used by the artist are manufactured and ready-made products, we must conclude that all the paintings in the world are ready-made, aided, and also works of assemblage. So then, what are the principles of art and design, and how can they connect to the ready-made? So this is what I present to the students. These kind of 16 principles of art and design, balance, symmetry, direction, emphasis, unity. I could go through all of them. But for this, I'm going to show sort of a few slides. For example, what I present to them, just as an introduction. And I introduce like a kind of topic and an example of what is balance, right? And then I give them a sort of graphic representation of what it would be, something that's more kind of geared towards graphic design, let's say. Show them sort of like a photograph and kind of more textual examples. And then depending on the, the students, show them, this is for like the interior designers, they get to see sort of examples of maybe what balance would be in interior design. And then another example like symmetry, for example, and show them symmetry in nature, symmetry in constructed sort of stained glass window, symmetry in a drawing, kind of give them a wide range of options to look at. This is the Louvre Abu Dhabi from above by Jean Nouvel. Give them an architectural example. And then some like interior design examples. Show them, talk about asymmetry. So kind of go through the catalog of information, Van Gogh's Starry Night, and then into, depending on the student body, right? Kind of give them different things to look at. So I wanted to just kind of show some of the student projects and their kind of their interpretations of the assignment. So this is a set of speakers that's been reconfigured into symmetry, a comb into proportion, glasses, photographs of glasses, which then, this is one of the better ones, just because she reinterpreted it and turned them kind of almost into like dragonflies. So thinking about repetition. And so the rest is just, the rest of the talk really is kind of examples of these graphic representations. So this is a part of foundation class where the students do both, 2D to 3D and 3D to 2D and kind of do those kinds of studies. So this is another strong one, rhythm, just from one running shoe, and then she kind of deconstructed the running shoe and changed the portions of it. And I guess they're easier to see over here. What's the time like? I have half an hour or 2 minutes? Okay. So I'll just kind of go through all these are just all examples of, so, taking their ready-made found object and reinterpreting it through the terms of art and design. So I guess to me, I find it to be it's been a useful exercise, and the first iteration of it was more loose in terms of the graphic assignment, where they took the object and then gave a title to the poster that was self-referential. And then the second iteration has been to kind of zoom in and give them a more structured approach to the assignment. So this is another example of glasses, and I have a few, I like quotes, so I'll end off with a few quotes. So to summarize and finalize the contents and some of the thoughts covered in this presentation, I will end with a series of quotes that I'm still aiming towards incorporating and rounding out the paper that would be connected to this to go deeper. Yet is this quality of the ready-made is too often overlooked as a mode of creation. It mimics precisely what we consumers perpetually do within consumerist society. We choose from the multitude of already existing objects, pre-made and mass for the masses, to express ourself. Although creativity is increasingly viewed as a key human ability that contributes to an individual's personal development, everyday life problem solving, professional accomplishment, and societal growth, the process that underlines the production of creative work remains somewhat mysterious. And another one from Chris Bart: they had become academic achievers, products of a system that rewards knowledge more than understanding or questioning. To them, doubt in the form of unsureness was anathema. Last one. All right. Since ancient times, the creative process has been the source of interest and speculation. The muse, as evoked in historical Greek texts, involved a divine source which inspired mortals to express new ideas. The inspiration was divine, but the delivery process involved people who served as scribes or oracles. Thank you. Sure. Sure.
Shouldn't I switch? Who switches here? I'll time it too. Just didn't realize we had double setup. I would have been. I got lots of text instead. Make sure the camera's got you. It doesn't. I'll walk around. Yeah, is that all right? Follows me?
Yeah, once it's got your face,
It follows me?
Yeah.
I don't like that, but
It's not doing any,
follows me, the camera.
it makes less work for me.
I know, but all right.
It was row, right?
You bet it's row.
There we go. Get this over on the side. There we go.
Nah, baby, and we're good.
And then let's see if what is supposed to be
Here,
Actually,
just-
it's not. Great. You are good to go.
Okay.
Hold on, I did that again. Sorry.
You think you had too many slides? Just wait.
You got more?
I make you look
Is
good.
the
Don't
event
worry.
still working?
Got even more.
Trust me.
Way better. design. So
All right, there we go.
like,
All right.
slide in.
You are good to go.
It's like a-
Our next presenter is Aidan Rowe. Aidan is presenting at the Vanguard Building Design Education for the 21st Century.
All right, thank you. Title scares me. Two things, I guess. Much of my work really looks at the application of design outside of design. Almost all the teaching that I do is in things like medicine, engineering, and nursing. It's kind of fun for me. And the other part of my work really looks at how we teach design education, and how we can improve that, how I can improve that in a selfish way. And sometimes I think it's really odd because often I'm preaching to the converted. You're already at a conference doing these, thinking about these things. Yes. So it's never meant, I recognize that lots of this work is going on. Sometimes it's really just for me and I got to say it out loud. So we'll go from here. And as it's a blended presentation, I've got a lot of text on here that I'm going to read through just so it helps for people that are watching within there. I want to start with this quote from Montaigne. We need to fear the consequences of our work more than we love the cleverness of our ideas. So I want to argue, and I think we all agree, that the space of design is in flux, and it's always been in flux. Design shifts. But design generally comes from the idea of an apprenticeship system, focusing on materials, outputs, and artifacts. But now design likes to position itself at the forefront of fields that can address complex societal issues. And that's super exciting for me, and I hope for everybody here. As Scupelli, Wasserman, and Wells-Papanek note, design shifts as the world shifts. Design thinking and design methodologies evolve to address the complexity of ongoing and emerging societal challenges. These shifts and evolutions represent a rethinking of how we define design and who is a designer. And the act of establishment of an identity and future for design is a crucial activity. And in this presentation, I argue that this examining this future, the designing of design, needs the voices and practice of design education, particularly in schools, academics, and students themselves. So I want to begin by discussing recent changes and shifts in the discipline of design, specifically its increased specialization or fragmentation, that's sometimes called, and the expansion of design practice, its growth. Then I want to explore needed curriculum qualities, identifying 4. And again, these are really obvious in some sorts of ways, I would like to think, or hope there, to further develop more robust and authentic design education practices and environments. As Jones notes in discussing the future of design, it's clear to me that no big change is possible until we change ourselves and our ideas. And it's critical that design educators and students are at the center of this pedagogical frontline, defining design's features and identity. All right, so first, as I said, I want to talk about changes to design, increased specialization and expansion. So the discipline of design, as we knew, grew out of a guild-based system that broadly focused on materials and practice, and was often, and still today, is often framed as a service providing practice. Often design is reactive. The industry wants something, the client needs something, they're agree, we do something. There's often a notion that design doesn't exist unless there is somebody external that's part of that process. The 20th century saw the continued evolution of the discipline, with concretizing into specializations in addition to responding to growing need, technological opportunity, and disciplinary possibility. Design today, though, sits at an exciting moment, one where there's recognition of the possibility of its practices to affect serious and consequential change. Design is being invited into conversations that it never was, throughout the process in much larger ways than where design often historically was employed, often really at the end of sort of, let's say, projects or processes. Interestingly, though, this recognition of design's potential has often come from outside the discipline. People want to work with designers. People in medicine, in business, in nursing, and health are really interested in what design can bring to the conversation that maybe offers something different than prescribed or traditional sorts of notions. And to me, that's really fascinating. This idea of recognizing what design can do from outside, it's sort of affirming. Everybody likes that. Yes, just sort of like, maybe you can do something. Maybe you can help this sort of way. As Bella Gattamole et al. State, design is being facilitated in disciplines as diverse as business management, engineering, education, and information technology. The evolution and embrace of design has been bracketed by 2 contrasting really important. The first is that of an increased specialization, and the second involves an opening up of the field of design. While design has a long history of specialization, originally this was often driven by materials involved or the final output desired. For example, graphic design, furniture design, fashion design, interior design. More recently, though, we see a significant expansion of specialization in design. And importantly, this road often moves beyond material or output classification. Rogers and Brenner state that this expansion allows the discipline to move beyond the design of objects and spaces to include designing cities, landscapes, nations, cultures, bodies, genes, political systems, and the way we produce food, to the way we travel, build cars, and clone sheep. And these shifts are important. First, they document the growing recognition of design to address broad societal issues. I'm interested in design as something that contributes and improves the world. And being invited in those conversations is exciting and important, I think. Second, the growing specialization notes the field's maturation as well, recognizing evolution from its historical disciplinary constraints. This change is important for the discipline's development as the historical structures are not only limited to the potential of our discipline, they also maintain and conserve structural inequalities. The increased popularity of design, particularly what love it or hate it, people often call design thinking, reflects the adoption of the practices, processes, and language of design in many other fields. The widespread recognition of design creates opportunity to contribute to addressing major challenges far beyond the scope of traditional practice. It also raises questions about who is a designer. Somebody works with design processes and methods and fields of design. Are they a designer? And more critically, at least for us, what does the education of a designer look like in this setting? Crucially, the advances and responses in the discipline of design noted above are often not fully reflected within design education. Traditional design pedagogy is often atavistic, reactive, and ill-suited to educate designers to work in a discipline that is expanding its disciplinary, conceptual, theoretical, and methodological framework to encompass ever wider disciplines, activities, and practices. Furthering this, Scupelli, Wasserman, and Wells Pattner state design for the 21st century requires different skills, and design educators are challenged to teach new skills within an already packed curriculum. When we talk about teaching new things, there's no magic new space to teach those things generally, or at least where I am. Something needs to be removed. Something needs to be altered. We're reticent to do that often for many reasons. So here I want to argue for 4 specific curriculum qualities to be included or expanded within design pedagogy to create more relevant, flexible, and ultimately effective design. If as Noel notes, the goal of design education is to provide society with responsible, knowledgeable, and skilled professionals that can help people better achieve their goals, then our curriculum must enable it. Some caveats, of course. This list is neither exhaustive nor universal. There are other needs accounting for specific histories, resources, and context. But these identified qualities further development of design pedagogy, where students can learn to become designers that can act critically while articulating possibilities for design in the 21st century. And while I present these individually, they support and further each other. And they do not work in isolation from existing practices. And it's important to note that many people already do these. We all have these qualities in some sense. I'm saying that I think we really need to expand how we treat them. There's exemplar schools and programs that are at the vanguard pedagogically in these areas. But overall, I would argue there's still work to do. There's always. So the first thing I want to talk about is creating more genuine opportunities for interdisciplinary practice. That's the first. Design has a long history of interdisciplinary. People would often argue that design is, it's only interdisciplinary. It only works with other people. Designers work with a range of people to address needs across a range of disciplines, practices, and locations. And historically, and often today, these activities were viewed through a transactional lens. Design is a service provider often, with designers hired to complete a specifically defined path for customers. Many factors, though, have shifted design's role in addressing problems in light of interdisciplinarity. In the first instance, the scale and scope of current design challenges have increased, further driving the need for multidisciplinary knowledge and expertise. Design today has to work with a much broader range of people who all speak different languages, have different histories, have different sorts of practices. Additionally, design's growing popularity and the recognition of design's ability to address complex challenges means that design is being invited to the table much more in more meaningful way, which is very exciting. And while there's a growing significant display collaboration in design practice, there's often less evidence of this within design education. As Klassen notes, despite the developments of interdisciplinary research, innovation hubs, and interdisciplinary teamwork, the spin-off from interdisciplinary ways of working trickle down very slowly in academic education. Interdisciplinary opportunities within design education exist, although they've often followed design as a responsive service provider model, or explored these opportunities in controlled, fictionalized, and truncated ways, often at the ends of projects, or as a service provider designing something in a brief that's already been set, or a process that's already been decided. Advances in the design discipline and greater external recognition of its practices present significant prospect to reframe design pedagogy to include more genuine interdisciplinary opportunities where students get to work with people in other disciplines, including other students. Educators have noted that the benefits of incorporating authentic interdisciplinary learning opportunities are multiple. They enable students to be able to collaborate, communicate, and integrate activities and projects. And secondly, there's growing recognition within higher education that interdisciplinary learning opportunities lay the foundation for individual, lifelong learning and collaboration in multiple disciplines. Design educators need to embrace the opportunities to better create learning opportunity environment where students can genuinely work with others in and outside the classroom to further develop these skills. So design programs in universities have opportunities to further collaborating with other departments. Opportunities also exist outside of design programs to foster these opportunities. For example, certificates at the faculty or university level, practicums, work experiences. As Richard Buchanan reports, design is no longer a self-contained discipline that can exist in isolation. Designers must understand and work closely with colleagues in other disciplines. Our design pedagogy must better model and support these opportunities. The second area I want to talk about is expansion of user-centered. There's long been a movement in design to further recognize, situate, and substantiate the user in the design process. While many tangents are driving the reconsideration of the role of the user in design, I identify three interrelated themes advancing these changes and substantiate the need to embed them in our pedagogy. First, there's a continued push to move from an abstract user to real participant. So idealized people to actual sort of, and working with people's challenging. Anybody's ever worked with people? People are individual, people are unique, people aren't abstract in any sort of way. And while design has always recognized that a user, often it's been idealized, fictionalized, or framed as a customer. More recently, this has been expanding to an increase of working with actual people. Recently, these user-centered approaches that are increasingly recognized as insufficient. Sanders and staffers say the traditional user-centered design approach cannot address the scale or complexity of the challenges we face today. We're no longer simply designing products for users. We're designing for the future experiences of people, communities, and cultures who are now connected and more informed in ways that were unimaginable even 10 years ago. Second, recognizing the benefits of increased participation of users throughout the whole design process. So things like co-design, participatory design are obviously growing in popularity. Contemporary design values the lived experience and personal expertise that participants bring. And third, there's also a growing recognition of the effects, intentional or not, of design on a wider range of users. Jody Perlizzi argues for moving beyond a user-centered focus and proposes stakeholder-centered. Noting that traditional user-centered design approaches often translate as designing one thing for one person, not recognizing that design today deals with different entities interacting with and through products, services, and systems to achieve a desired outcome. It's crucial for design education to further embrace the opportunities to embed a richer array of user-centered and beyond design practices. Students need to genuinely identify and work with participants. For example, embedding user testing or introductory data gathering into groups throughout the design process, while grappling with questions of who we design for, why we design, and importantly, who's affected by our design. The third thing I want to focus on is an increased focus on cultural interrogation. Historically, design, like most professions, has existed as a local practice where designers typically share language, history, and experiences, in short, culture, with the majority of their clients and users. Design professionals today often, though, work across languages and time zones. Designer might live in one country, work with a client in another, with their intended users in a third, or likely dispersed around the globe. One question as design educators is how to prepare students for this interconnected world that often our students are much more familiar with, much more comfortable with. Empowering them to recognize their own practices, beliefs, and conventions, and successfully work with others, often removed from them. Two means of actively addressing this need involve employing the lens of culture and the use of an anthropological approach. To begin, I draw on Bruner's broad definition that culture shapes the mind, that it provides us with the toolkit by which we construct not only our words, but our very conceptions of ourselves and our powers. This positioning of culture recognizes a wide range of possibilities for culture to be both shaped and shaper. And this explicitly links it with design, which is focused on constructing that which does not yet exist. One means of embedding culture in design education is through an anthropological approach, situating oneself in new environments, asking questions, and gaining insights from the field to inform future decisions. As Postman and Weingartner note, this approach, which they term, I love this, the most subversive intellectual instrument, allows a practitioner to be part of his own culture, and at the same time, to be shouldn't use that word. The changing environments of higher education have supported and often driven increased cultural heterogeneity. We see increased internationalization of our student populations and expanded access to global cultural products, all resulting in further opportunities to expose to and work with different beliefs, mores, and practices. In short, culture. While embracing these external factors, design pedagogy also needs to further incorporate opportunities for deeper and more meaningful interrogation. For example, increased learning with people and communities outside of the studio. Moving students out of the studio or bringing communities in enables students to encounter different practices and beliefs. It also helps them to understand the synergy between knowing, doing, and being. It must be recognized that curriculum choices also play a significant role in reinforcing dominant and accepted cultures. Design educators need to interrogate their choices in a better range of cultural models, the ignored, the underrepresented, and the marginalized, as a means of substantiating and expanding our education. As Lipton and Z declare, design is generally thought as a normative practice, but it can also be transformative. And often this corrective work, though, is shuffled to those areas teaching contextual studies of design. And these actions are just as, if not more important, in the studio environment. Design educators must embrace the possibility for culture to be an activity, not a thing, recognizing the opportunity for design education and, more importantly, design students to contribute to the art of seeking to find and express identity and purpose. The fourth quality I want to talk about is education that explores design critically. Over the last 20 years, we've seen an increased shift in design practice, moving beyond its historic disciplinary boundaries that have often framed through a capitalist service model. While there are many labels for these explorations, critical design, speculative design, design futures, what they commonly seize upon is the opportunity to reposition design from a reactive to an active practice, where design can be framed as a critical endeavor, one that also asks questions, not only of what it brings forth, but also of itself. Within design, I know two broad themes that contribute to this shift in criticality. The first involves repositioning design from problem-solving activity to one that also embraces problem-defining or setting areas, and related the growing practice of applying a critical lens to design practice itself. Recognizing the possibility of design as problem-defining, sometimes it's called problem-setting, problem-seeking, activity has been growing in many areas of design practice and education broadly. As Mortati states, problem solving no longer is the most relevant activity for design. In our uncertain world, establishing what problems are worth exploring is a priority interest. This is a crucial shift, questioning design's ability to solve problems, which I've always had problems with. Through there. It's a long-standing simplistic definition, I would say. All right. And facilitates larger conversations about what the problem is and what response is needed. In short, it furthers our agency for design and designers. Looking critically at its own history, practice, and its future, we see a growing number of design professionals advancing design practice in this vein. A prominent example is Dun and Rabi's work in critical design, which I've got many problems with as well, but it's interesting, which questions existing design practice. I'm on time. Okay, I'm wrap. Okay. Looking to further design's ideological possibilities, noting design that asks carefully crafted questions and makes us think is just as important as design that solves problems or finds answers. The common theme in design's evolution is increased recognition of the many effects of design activity. As Findelli states, design responsibility means that designers always should be conscious of the fact that each time they engage themselves in the design process, they somehow recreate it. As the design profession has further embraced notions of criticality, there's not been a strong response within design education. With design pedagogy, it has a long history of using critical elements within its teaching practice, let's say critiques. These practices are often situated and focused. As Thiessen notes, the critique can be done without conceptualization or consideration of the intent of the piece. It can be used to resolve a quite narrow aspect of a piece of work, and it can focus purely on examining visual and formal features. I'll just jump into my conclusion, sorry. Always a bit too long. Mortati notes design today is a significant profession, recognized as able to address the technical demands, ongoing concerns, but also the creative and social factors at play. A growing portion of the design profession have embraced these opportunities, strengthening their practices in a myriad of areas to better reflect the demands of contemporary practice and to plan out new disciplinary possibilities. Often design education, though, has not been as quick to react and seize these opportunities. Here I've identified 4 curricular areas needed to strengthen design pedagogy to better reflect advances in the profession, and importantly, to chart design's future. These are genuine opportunities of interdisciplinary practice, expansion of user-centered approaches, increased focus on cultural interrogation, and education that explores design critically. My last slide. Meyer and Norman posit that design is a complex field. It is both a practice and academic discipline. The collective actions noted here, which reflect the vanguard design practice, are crucial to further move design pedagogy from one that is reactive and conceptualized as a supplier of talent to industry to one that can contribute to address key issues in the 21st century. It was the last slide. Woo-hoo. Thank you. The camera thing is scary. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take a picture of me.
We'll get you to close out.
Okay.
You just take a photo. Yeah.
That's a good. Yeah, no,
Yeah, this is my school. I need to make a little.
It's already up.
Oh.
Right, so our next presenter is the art, Track1. Art is going to present positive sound design methods and strategy. Thank you, Art.
Thank you. And just so you all know, I have 3 other colleagues that have worked on this with me. Will Rudder, Ruth Schmidt, and Ian Goncher. Will and Ruth are both joining us by Zoom. They will be listening in and watching, and then they'll be available during the question period. Ian is unfortunately at another event today, so he's not able to be here. So thank you all for having us. I'm going to try to stay relatively close to the screen, so that they can hear me.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. All right.
It's okay.
Controller is working. Yep. You can use this. And let me
That's
just
right.
get the camera up on you properly. There you go. You're up. And I believe, sorry, it was Ruth and Will.
Yeah, Ruth and
You're
Will.
here. If you need to speak up at any point, you're welcome to unmute and join us.
Is this, can I
Yes.
see the screen?
Absolutely.
also?
But the screen is,
Yeah, it's perfect. It's just because this little white light is
Gotcha.
like brightly in the face, and
Okay.
so I just, yeah. Oh, I got it. I
they
got
just say
that.
there's nothing on.
There's
screen.
nothing on screen. Yeah, you're okay. Sorry about that.
No, it's not, that's fine.
You have it all. Emiliano has this whole thing under control, and I'm just like making a mess. Okay. All right, I'm Arthi. I had to make a couple of updates to my slides because as I saw, my previous colleague's typography was like way better than mine. So I will just, as a design nerd, I feel like all of us in the room, we probably have these feelings as well. So I'm super happy to actually follow these gentlemen because they have to some extent set the stage for what we'll talk about today. Our talk is called Positive Sum Design. And this is a new area that we're exploring. No, nothing is happening.
Sorry.
Nope.
No, it's not you.
Okay.
Go ahead, try again.
And Ruth and Will, can you hear me if I'm standing here?
We've got you. Thank you, Arthi.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay, great. So positive sum design. So positive sum design is a newish concept, something that Ian Goncher has been writing about since about, I think, 2017, 2018. And what it is both a critique of the current cultural practice and a way that designers can use their skills to reframe through creativity and other methods. And so what is a positive sum? So how many of you all are familiar with game theory, zero-sum games? I'm seeing some nodding. Okay, so this is basically building on what we know from game theory, that there are zero-sum games. And so a zero-sum game is like, we have a pie, and if I get half the pie and you get half the pie, great. But if I want 2/3 of the pie, then you only get 1/3 of the pie. We've got one pie and it is zero sum. So that works for some types of things, but as Aiden has identified, there are so many problems that designers are increasingly faced with working on that zero sum games and zero sum framing may not be the right framing for the types of problems that we are being asked to work on. So what is a positive sum? And so we have a couple of examples of positive sums. First is oxpeckers. And so are you guys familiar with oxpeckers? So oxpeckers are a bird. They are from Africa. They're this little dude right here. And what they do is they have a wonderful symbiotic relationship with large animals in Africa. So large animals in Africa, like this ox here, are generally covered in all over the world. They're covered with flies and other insects that bug them, bother them, create problems for their health and their well-being. And so what these oxpecker birds do is they hang out on oxes and other large animals and they pick all of the bugs off of them. And the benefit of the relationship is during the hot day, during when there's times when the birds are doing other things, could be doing other things, they have a place to be that is relatively safe. They have food that they are able to eat. And the benefit for the ox and all these other animals is that they are clean, their skin is better, they're not developing diseases and other problems based on these bugs. And so it is a beneficial, mutual beneficial relationship. It is a positive sum. Nothing bad is going to happen to the bird because it's eating things, and nothing bad is going to happen to the ox because the bird is not. So it's great. Another example, so that's an example from nature. We see this a lot in nature. Let's look at an example in real life. And so there's this jumbo grocery stores, and these grocery stores are a little bit different than a traditional grocery store. What they found was that a lot of the folks that went to this grocery store happened to be elderly. And when standing in line at a grocery store, elderly folks perhaps are not necessarily trying to get through the line as fast as possible. They're also trying to establish and be involved with social relationships. So the act of standing in line, the act of shopping, it is not about doing it as quickly as possible, getting your stuff, getting in, getting out, getting on your way, but rather the social experience of being in the store, of being around other people, of having this collaborative, beneficial experience. And so this grocery store saw this pattern and realized that they could change how they designed the grocery store to better create a positive experience for the different types of consumers that were coming in. For consumers that were coming in that wanted to get in, get out, buy a couple things and leave, they created an express line where they could go through the line quite quickly and they could be efficient and they could get through the process. For folks that wanted to spend more time in the line, more time at the store, have a more social experience, they created an alternate line where they could spend more time, where they could have a positive benefit. Different values, different uses, different needs create different outcomes. So this is another positive sum situation where we have one alternative where you get through quickly and the other alternative where it takes longer, but both parties, both sets of stakeholders or users have a positive experience. So this is just another sort of way of thinking about this. And when we think about positive sums, oftentimes in design, oftentimes in our work, we think, let's add, let's do more, let's make more changes. But as we know, Dieter Rams says, less can be better, less but better. So we can think about how do we change how we think? How do we change how we work in order to reflect this in our practice? And then how do we teach this to our students? Our students are oftentimes in our projects thinking about projects with a zero-sum bias. For me to win, you have to lose. For me to make something, I have to use the resources that I have. It is a fixed pool of resources, and I have to work only with what I have. These are constraints in the system. These are constraints that I have to work within. What if we reframe that entire activity? And so there we get the positive sum design triangle. Now, I wish that Will was here to present this because he does a little bit of a better job on this, but for the purposes of you not having to hear like a voice in the sky, I'm going to do my best to cover Will's section of this talk. But if you have any questions about the triangle, about how we came up with some of this language, I encourage you to ask during the question session, and we'll be happy to talk a bit more about that. So we have the three nodes of our triangle: mutability of constraints, mediation by incentives, and the multivariance of utility. So first, we're going to talk about multivariance of utility. So basically what we're saying here is that for different people, they're going to have different value or want to use things differently in a certain situation. So this is a very classic example of cake. So we have a cake, and a cake, not unlike the pie example, seems to be a zero-sum proposition. Seems to be, if I get this piece of cake, you get that piece of cake, there's only so much cake to go around. So what happens if I don't like cake, but I love icing? And my friend, who I'm sitting with, loves cake and hates icing. Then we have taken our cake and we have changed it. Come on in, please join us. So we've taken our cake and we've changed how we think about it. It is no longer zero sum because for me, the cake part is not useful. And for my friend, the icing part's not useful. So actually we have almost the effect of two cakes, because I get all the icing, they get all the cake. So it's a situation where the utility of this cake varies. There's multivariance of utility. Subsequently, if you think about the cake differently, we might be able to actually expand the value that each individual gets from cake. What about the mutability of constraints? So we're at the beach, it's hot, I want some water. But me and my friends, we only have one bottle of water. This is a constraint. There's an entire ocean, but I've only got one bottle of water. So if we think of this bottle of water as a single individual water bottle carrier that only can hold the amount of water that's in the bottle, then we have a serious constraint. But if we look down the beach and we see that there's a water fountain right over there, then this water bottle is not a constraint. It's actually something that expands the ability to have water. Because now, not just me gets this much water, me and all of my friends can use this one bottle to get as much water as we need from the water fountain. So we've changed how we think about constraints, and we've changed how we think about our resources. So constraints can actually be mutable. The last one is mediation by incentives. And I think because we talked before, you guys are familiar with game theory and with games like Prisoner's Dilemma. So Prisoner's Dilemma is a classic game, and I'm just going to talk a bit about the incentives here. And the idea here is that incentives are what drive our actions. And if we create incentives that are not the ones that are positive, or our incentives don't align, then we may look at situations in a way that actually reduces the value that we have. And so what we do in Prisoner's Dilemma is, as you guys know, if everyone cooperates, we have a win-win. If one person defects and the other one cooperates, then we have a win-lose. And then if everyone defects, we have a lose-lose. And what oftentimes happens, because we are protecting our incentives and we're protecting our interests, is we pick lose-lose. But what if we were to change our incentives? What if we were to change how we thought about the situation, or we knew more about the situation? Then we could yield a cooperate result, or a different type of result that would be a more positive result. So, okay, so that was a little bit of theory. I hope I'm doing okay on time. So now we're going to move into the workshop and the practice. So I talk about positive sum design. Positive sum design is fine in theory, but how do we take something like this and bring it into the classroom? And so what me and my colleagues have come up with is what we're hoping to be a series of different exercises, and we've workshopped the first one. And the first one that we're going to talk about is based on the theory of lines from Don Norman. He wrote a great paper about lines and talked about 8 principles of waiting in line. I'm just going to read these for you guys so you can hear them, but we'll go back to them. So we've got in line, emotions dominate. You want to eliminate confusion by providing a conceptual model, feedback, and explanation. The wait must be appropriate. You should set expectations, then meet or exceed them. You should keep people occupied while they're in line, because filled time passes more quickly than unfilled time. You should be fair. You should end strong and start strong. And then you must always remember that the memory of the event is more important than the event itself. And so what is a line? It's often just the memory of that line. Okay, so the workshop that we created was all about reframing the game. So one of the fundamental things that positive sum design and positive sum work allows you to do is reframe the game. So how do we reframe the game of standing in line? Sorry about this one. This one's a little bit small. So we did a workshop with my students in the class. As I said, I had to fix a little typography, but I could only get so much done. So our workshop had 4 different parts. First, we had our students brainstorm examples of where they would wait in line. Some of the ones that they came up with: highways, grocery stores, TSA, Disney. Promotions for work was another one that came up a bunch. The next, we asked them to pick out in their small groups. And we created groups of about 5 or 6. My class is 23. And so we had 4 groups in the class, and I'll talk a little bit about the structure of the workshop and some things that we want to change going forward. So at the beginning, in the big group, we brainstormed the examples, then we broke them all into groups, and they worked on thinking about 2 types of line and listing constraints and opportunities for each one. So in the same way as we have multivariance utility and incentives and so forth, we said, how do you take the constraints of these lines, the things that appear to be constraints, and we turn them into opportunities? Then we asked them to do an activity of what is the best possible outcome for our end users? Like, what do they actually want to be doing? And then the last thing we have them do is redesign the experience of standing in line. So how can you actually add value to this experience? So the first thing, as I said, we had them do was identify the distinct types of lines and the purposes of the lines for each of the different stakeholders. And so music festivals, why are they there? They did, you know, the kind of classic design exercises. And then we had them list the constraints and the opportunities for each line situation. And just so you all know, these are exercises and so forth that we will be publishing on our website so that other folks can use them and adapt them and so forth. So, so then you can list your constraints and your opportunities for each of the situations. And this was a really, really positive experience for the students because it required them to think about their worlds in a different way. It required them to say, we traditionally think about lines as a kind of an experience we don't love. We think about lines as an experience that is not fun, but we must now think about this in a little bit of a different way. So what did they do during this process? They found that they were thinking about what's the best type of experience. Are you trying to be efficient or are you trying to create a great experience? Are you trying to fill that dead time? Or are you trying to do something with that dead time that makes the experience better for folks? And this would allow you to think about what is the best possible outcome. What are people's experiences when they begin the line and what are their experiences when they end the line? So one example of this one that came up in class was the Disney line. So what happens in a Disney line? You're waiting forever and ever and ever. Disney has designed the park so that you wait in line for a long period of time. So when you're doing this, what can you do or what has Disney done to expand the value or add value to that line? Well, they've started actually sending characters down the line to talk to the kids while they're in line. So they are creating value. They are actually turning the activity of being in the line into a fun activity. So that waiting in line is actually almost like a ride. So it's like it's not about efficiency anymore. In fact, for some people, the longer you spend in line, the more time you get to spend with the characters. So this is great. So the experience of the ride actually starts much earlier. So you're changing what it is. So then the next one we talked about is multivariance of utility. What's better, to go faster or to make it better? So when you're thinking about lines like in a place like the DMV, what we found was when you go to the DMV, you have to have all this documentation, you have to fill out all these forms, you have to have other pieces of either insurance, paperwork, or other things with you when you get there. Maybe there's a way in the DMV so that folks don't have to do so much pre-work before they get there to make the line process part of filling out forms. Are there stations in the line? Is there something that you can do when you're entering the line when you get there that will pre-check your documentation and the other things that you bring with you? How can we take the aspect of getting in line, submitting the paperwork, doing that, and make it better? So basically what you're trying to do with this, as our student said, is design around the bottleneck. The other thing that you can do, maybe not in the DMV, but in other kinds of lines, perhaps lines for waiting for concerts, lines in social situations, is you can actually make friends in line. This is going to be very telling in terms of my age. So back in the day when we used to buy concert tickets, we used to have to line up outside of Tower Records or other record stores overnight. And part of the fun of going to the show was waiting in line to buy your tickets because you made friends in line that you would end up seeing at the show. So in this case, the utility of the line is not get through it fast as buy my ticket, but rather have a really cool experience and expand the fun of going to the concert, or spend a little bit less time before doing my DMV paperwork and then use the time that I'm wasting in line to then actually do that paperwork. So different ways of thinking about that. Incentives is something that is a little bit harder to think about and something that that the students actually had a bit of a harder time thinking of. So like, what are the incentives? How do we structure systems to create positive incentives for good behaviors? And so for this type of thing, it's like, is it a payoff to do something or is it a chore? So what is the incentive structure that we're using to ask people to engage in our systems? Are we rewarding them or are we punishing them? Are we making it a waiting experience because they're, waiting and time is being, sort of wasted? Or is this a positive experience of getting, where the incentive is positive and the reinforcement is positive? So one of the examples here that we thought about was a buffet line. So sometimes in buffet lines, you're waiting, and it takes forever and ever. Other times they do past hors d'oeuvres or something, or they do like a Trader Joe's or some such. They might have like the station with the food on the Friday afternoon, so that when you're waiting in your super long Trader Joe's line, you can like nosh and snack during the day. So the line is actually a place where you eat and you do things rather than a place that is just a time sucking, negative, and waiting. And so you're changing the incentive structure for actually waiting in the line. Another area of importance that we found was establishing affordances for communication. So when you are in a line, when you are in a process like this one, you are actually establishing affordances for communication. You're making the rules that you're going to use as you go through the system. An example that we use classically from game theory is that of the stag hunt. So we're all on the stag hunt, and if everybody doesn't cooperatively agree to be quiet, we're going to scare away all the stags, and it's going to not be successful. So how do we make the line process or the process of design include these affordances for communication such that we can establish rules before we get into structures amongst us so that we can have more positive experiences. And then the last kind of generalized concept that came out of this this workshop was the idea of competition versus cooperation. And so this one, I'm not sure how many of you drive, so if any or all or most of you drive, you may be familiar with merging onto the highway in traffic. And when you have zero-sum bias and you get to that merge, and perhaps you're a little bit frustrated or you're having a little bit of road anger after work or something, you might say, you know what, I'm not letting you in. I'm just going to go. I'm going to go first and I'm going to get through. But the reality is, when we look at traffic dynamics, that zipper merging is better. Yes, you're going to have to wait for the car to go in front of you, but the traffic is not going to be as bad overall. We know this so much that in places like California, they actually have red lights on both lanes. So they structure the zipper merge because it is so much better and so much more efficient. However, our competitive zero-sum bias makes us want to compete and get in one first rather than another way. And so we think about, as we have our students redesign lines, redesign and reframe the game, how can they break zero-sum bias to then create different types of affordances? 4 minutes? Okay, cool. Okay, great. So the last one was about conditions of possibility, equality versus equity. This is a bathroom lines at sporting events. This is kind of the classic example here. If you're a female and you're waiting in line, it might be 500 people long. If you're a male and you're waiting in line, it might be not quite as longer. The line might move much faster. So this is a equality versus equity question. The other thing to think about, however, is what is the quality of the bathroom experience for men versus women? What do you do when you're in there? You go to the urinal and you pee. You go to the bathroom and then you redo your makeup. You change your outfit. You talk to your neighbors. You do this whole thing. So when we're thinking about designing the experience, when we think about conditions of possibility, we want to think about how do different people utilize this resource or service, and how do we design the conditions of possibility to best support what people are trying to do. Cool. Okay, so I probably only have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of go a little bit quickly. What we want to do in all of our work as design educators, or at least this is my bias, is what we would like to do is we have our students do exercises, we have them work on things, and then we try to draw themes or principles that they could in theory apply to other projects. So positive sum design is all about, and this workshop was all about, enabling our students to think about problems in a different way, to critique their own biases, and to come at situations with something that's a little bit different. And so we went back to some of the principles from Don Norman's paper when we thought about what are some of these generalizable themes that can come out of this type of workshop that we can then teach in our classes. So one was about being fair. And so this one is goes right back to the zipper merge example. So here's where people assign credit and blame. If waiting in line seems reasonable, even though it is a negative experience, it will not necessarily trigger a strong negative emotion. The emotion comes if the line appears to be arbitrary, unpredictable, and worst of all, unfair. So what we're thinking about here, and when we're thinking about our students in design, is credit and blame is really, really important. How people feel is really, really important. And the perception of fairness in a line or in any experience is something that is going to have a critical emotional response for our end user. So as we design systems, think about being fair. Zero-sum bias can often lead to situations where something that is not fair or is not equitable is built into the system because of our biases about the system. So as we think about design, as we think about reframing zero sums into positive sums, we can think about a principle of being fair. How do you be fair in a way that is open and transparent and allows people to understand what's actually happening? And the zipper merge using lights is a way of doing that. It is countering our bias of competition, but it is doing so in a way that is transparent and shows us red light, green light, it is actually getting better. And we can see it on a day-to-day basis that our commute gets, that gets less bad, or that people on the road seem a little bit less road ragey. Another one, we talked about this before, is the memory of the event is more important than the experience. So I'll read this one for you so you guys don't read. Although waiting in line is universally disliked, there are times when it is useful to induce waits artificially. Traffic lights are an example of introducing a deliberate wait for one set of vehicles, the better to permit the other vehicles or to prompt people to gain access. In theme parks, the waits are deliberate. We talked about this before. So as we think about lines, let's use the theme park line as an example. Let's use the memory of these events. When you're waiting in line at a theme park and they introduce Disney characters into the line, you're probably going to have a positive memory of the Disney characters, not a negative memory of the line. So think about what you can do in order to create a positive memory, a positive association with what could have been considered a negative experience. Mutability of constraints, keep people occupied. Filled time passes more quickly than unfilled time. Psychological duration is dramatically affected by the mental activity of the person. While filled with events feel as if it is passing more quickly than the same physical time without events. An empty period, it is remembered as having lasted longer than the empty period. So for this one, it is when you're waiting in line to get a cup of coffee, or you're waiting in line to buy food or something. There's a reason that lines oftentimes have magazines, candy, and all sorts of things to keep you occupied as you're getting to the head of the line, because you have a less bad experience when something is happening, and also in the store experience, you're more likely to buy something when you're bored and waiting, passing time. So think about how you can create experiences where you do something in line that actually makes it a more positive experience. I have time. Okay, all right. So there's I think 2 slides. Okay, so creating these affordances, so eliminating confusion, providing a conceptual model. So how do you facilitate ways where users can coordinate behavior, align incentives, get buy-in, and all come together so that you can have an improved communication and an improved outcome? So the main idea here is that design creates value by turning constraints into opportunities. I'm going to race through these. At the end of our session, we had a student feedback survey that had 10 questions. I'll make it available to you guys so you can take a look at what the questions are. Lines are relatable. They're digital and non-digital ones, so it's accessible. People understand them. This isn't something confusing for folks. We also found that there's regional and national differences amongst perceptions of lines. So in England post-Queen, it was a national pastime, queuing. Everybody loved to do it. There are some Asian countries, my students have told me, that people jump from line to line. They get in the line, they go to the front of the line, they get to the front of the line, and that's all. And they just go to the next line. And they don't even care about what they're actually in line for. The act of being in line is almost like a game. And so they do it as a form of entertainment. So this was something that we hadn't thought about. Reflections and adaptations. What we will do in the future, we'll provide a reader about lines pre and post events. We're going to do the brainstorming a little bit differently. We're only going to have people choose one type of line to work on the constraints and opportunities to create some confusion for folks. And then we're going to make them go back into the full group to do the redesign, because the redesign in mini groups was a little bit harder. Next steps for you all to just know. We're going to adapt the workshop iteratively. We ran it in my class at Carnegie Mellon. We hope to run it at Brown with Ian's classes, and in IT with Ruth and Will's classes. And we've developed a website, the PositiveSumDesignInstitute.org. You can go and check out our work there, and we have an open conversation. We're inviting anybody to our convos. We meet generally Friday mornings at 9, not tomorrow, but we meet Friday mornings at 9 to talk about ideas. We welcome anybody to join that. We have a mailing list if you'd like to know, and we love your feedback. We did the reframing the game was the first one that we created, and we plan on developing additional methods for storytelling, scenarios, payoff matrices, and speculative prototyping. That's it.